Yeah, thank you again for inviting me, Ben and Sarah. And sorry we had to, change our plans. But if we learn one thing in extension, it's to always be flexible, right? Um, so yeah, I have been in extension for the last 2 years here as a soil health extension educator. And my previous work and my current research that I'm still involved with are probably mostly on cover crops and their soil health benefits. So today, the data that I'm showing you is from a large project that I was a part of together with Dr. Andrea Beisch from the agronomy department. So I'm going to dive right in. So we are going to talk about this project that we started in 2021 now. It was one of these rare 5-year projects, which you almost never get. But basically what we looked at was comparing or assessing cover crops for their cover crops in different cropping systems across the state of Nebraska, planted at different times, basically in different cropping windows. And then we looked at biomass and some soil health, although I'm not showing a lot of that today. So it was strictly cover crop data. And like I said, it was a large project. Lots of people were involved, professors. We had some farmers. We had some extension educators. So we selected, I think we had a total of 70 cover crops, again, planted at different sites and at different times. So we didn't, look at just corn and soybean systems. So how did we select varieties and measure performance? That was pretty difficult. There's so much selection, honestly. Most of us think of a cover crop just as cereal rye, but there's a lot more than that. So really, the varieties and the performance that we measured depended on the goal and the planting window. But in general, we always wanted cover crops that germinated fast, emerged fast. So in order to find that in order to assess that, we looked at stand counts and the percent of cover 4 weeks after planting. We also looked at forage quantity and fast growth, and we looked at the dry matter 8 weeks after planting, and then again at the end of the season. So biomass is similar to dry matter. Forage quality was also assessed in for some of our cover crops. I do want to, just make clear here that I'm not an animal scientist. So, Ben helped us a little bit on the project and some other people, but basically we did show, I will show today, some crude protein and relative feed values. And then more, going into soil health, we looked at nitrogen fixation and the total nitrogen and the amount of biomass. So what I'm going to show today, today, it's just going to be summer annuals, not usually the cover crop, again, the cover crops of choice or the ones that we hear the most about. So just some explanations. So we looked at, again, performance. We tested some of that using the percentage of canopy cover. So we looked at the amount of green basically in any given area, and we just use a cell phone app called Canopio for that. For biomass, when we refer to biomass, we mean all above ground growth. We dry that, weigh that, and convert that to pounds per acre. We can also call it dry matter. Doesn't really matter, biomass or dry matter. For us, it's the same thing. And then forage quality, we did Ward Labs did it for us, NIRS on fresh biomass. And so I am showing CP, and actually I'm not showing relative feed value, I'm showing TDN, so total digestible nutrients. Okay, so just briefly, the trials that we did were across Nebraska, but the summer annual trials that I'm gonna talk about today, we had one site in Bladen, South Central Nebraska, which is actually at the Green Cover facility. So Green Cover is a big seed company specializing in cover crops, and they're really a pioneer in soil health. And so they were, last year we had a trial there in 2023 that was also shown then at their field day. And then the other site that that we had trials at was Rogers Memorial Farm in Lincoln. And I'm going to talk about our 2022 results for that particular site. So why are we talking about summer annual crops and not just, say, cereal rye or anything that we plant in the fall? True that, for most of our cropping systems, corn and soybeans, summer annuals are not really an opportunity or an option because they really need the heat of the summer. So we have to plant them. We can plant them as full seasons, or we can plant them after, for example, wheat. However, they provide a lot of benefits. They are really productive. We have a much greater species selection than for our cool season cover crops that we're typically using. They can, provide things like nitrogen for soil health. If there are situations where we, for example, can't get into a field, or we have, pivot corners or things like that, that's a great place for summer annuals to be planted as a cover crop. So at this particular site, we planted cover crops May 24th, and then they lasted through October. They were all cover crops or all species that would be terminated by a hard freeze. So I'm giving you the species list here. As you can see, we had 18 different species. Sorghum Sudan, Sudan grass, sorghum. For the sorghum Sudans and the sorghums, we had a couple of different varieties because there are large varietal differences. There actually are, excitingly for us in the cover crop world, there actually are different varieties because with some of the cover crops that we work with, there's only like 1 or 2 varieties on the market. So sorghum and sorghum Sudans, they really have been, there's been a lot of breeding work done. Then we also had pearl millet and foxtail millet. The millets are more drought tolerant. They also, I would say, can be grown in established very fast and produce biomass in a short amount of time. Popcorn, we looked at grazing popcorn, interestingly, and then we had teff grass. Teff grass is kind of known for its high forage quality. It's not a very common grass yet, but we tested it out. For the broadleaves, we tried to bring in a couple of legumes, sun hemp and cowpea, and then we had a couple of other broadleaves that we are growing for their soil health benefits or their pollinator benefits, such as buckwheat, sunflower, and African cabbage. So again, we're trying for soil health, we're looking at diversity, we're looking at the root growth, we're looking at, fixing nitrogen, adding nitrogen to the system. And then we had several mixes. So some of them, were soil builder mix, another one was specifically for grazing, mycorrhizal mix, and high diversity mix. Some pictures of what these cover crops looked like. This was 6 to 8 weeks after planting. So the site at Bladen was irrigated and a pre-plant application of 80 pounds of nitrogen was done. So those are all, like I said, pretty productive species. So we had Sudan grass, forage sorghum here in the middle, sorghum Sudan hybrids. As you can tell, they all get pretty tall. Some of our mixes, we're a little bit shorter than the others. It kind of all just depends on what is growing there. We have the teff here. So again, it's a very fine-stemmed grass, quite different from what you can imagine a sorghum or a Sudan grass looks like. And then the millets, the cowpea, sun hemp, and buckwheat. So for the buckwheat, this is a crop just like the sunflower that's often included for pollinators. And as you can see here, they were already blooming just about 6 to 8 weeks after planting. So, and there's always a lot of insects that we find on those. Actually, a lot of monarchs really like buckwheat as a food source. So sun hemp is a tropical legumes, not very commonly planted yet, although it's often included in mixes, but we planted it also as a straight, a straight, yeah, straight variety. I'm going to start with the data. So we looked at, again, we want a cover crop to grow quickly, cover the ground. That's really important if we're thinking about trying to prevent erosion, keeping the soil in place. We want something that covers the ground quickly. So we used our Canopio app to measure that. And on the left side here in the blue writing, that is the canopy cover in percent, 3 weeks after planting. And then on the right side is actually the weed biomass 8 weeks after planting. So one of the things that we also wanted to assess is how well do those cover crops suppress weeds, because most farmers will not do any sort of weed control in a cover crop. So we need that cover crop to also suppress weeds. So what's kind of interesting here is that there's a lot of variability when it comes to weed biomass in the different cover crops. Wheat biomass is really low in the buckwheat, and buckwheat also covers the most amount of ground. Just 3 weeks after planting, it covers about 25% of the ground. Where some of the other grasses, especially, don't cover a lot of ground initially, and have much higher wheat biomass. So that's one of the interesting things that we found. We always, assumed there would be some differences, but it's nice to actually put some numbers to it. Then we looked at biomass. So we came in 8 weeks after planting and 20 weeks after planting and measured biomass. So the first measurement would have been done just in July. I think it was about mid-July, and the last one was at the end of the season, just before the plants died in October. So these plants are really, really productive. And for those of you that are working with fall cover crops, I mean, most of my work is with fall or winter annuals, such as rye or hairy veg or things like that. So to see a cover crop that produces that much biomass was really exciting. So by 8 weeks after planting, all of the cover crops had at least 1 ton of biomass per acre. And then at the end of the season, most of them had, over 5 tons of biomass per acre. So it's a lot of biomass, which is good for a lot of different things. For example, forage, right? Lots of our farmers are interested in forage. We tested forage quality actually. We did not cut or graze our plots. These are some plots that actually Green Cover did a little demonstration. So that's what the pictures are from here with the sheep. We do get a lot of questions from farmers about grazing. It's really a great way, in my opinion, to get more soil health, to get some animals back onto our crop fields. So that's why we decided to test forage quality. We did that early in the season. So we know that they had a really good amount of biomass, between 2 and 3 up to 5 tons per acre. This was in July when we measured biomass and forage quality. As far as forage quality, again, I just wanted to highlight a few things. So the sunflowers, actually, I've never would have thought, but it actually had actually, sunflower was really relatively poor in forage quality, even though it's kind of interesting. You actually saw quite a few of the animals eating the sunflowers. Our sorghum Sudan and the sorghums were pretty good. They're often used for forage, so we kind of expected them to have pretty decent forage quality. The best ones were actually the Coase forage sorghum and the pearl millet, the tiff leaf pearl millet. So they had a little bit higher crude protein, a little bit higher total digestible nutrients. Let me see. I think I had a few that were fairly low in forage quality. African cabbage, and high diversity mix, interestingly. I'm not entirely sure why. Um, so the legumes, we kind of expect them to be pretty good forage quality. They definitely did have really high crude protein. Um, yeah. The other thing that we did is we do know that many of those species, especially the sorghum Sudan, and Sudan grass to an extent, can have high nitrate levels. And so we tested nitrates. Actually, I shouldn't say just the sorghum and just the sorghums, because it can really be a lot of different plants that can be high in nitrogen. So we tested for nitrates in the samples that we took July 18th. I'm not showing the data here, but it came back as safe in all treatments. So that's a good thing. One thing we didn't test for was the prussic acid, but again, if a grower is interested, they can do that with some simple tests. The next last site that I wanted to talk to is the trials that we had at Rogers Memorial Farm in Lincoln. We had similar species, not exactly the same, but similar treatments of summer annual cover crops. Here we planted the cover crops after wheat. So we still grow quite a bit of wheat, not so much in eastern Nebraska, but we do grow some. And after wheat, that's a really fantastic window to establish some summer annual cover crops. This side was rain-fed, so no irrigation. We did not apply any nitrogen. So we planted right into the wheat stubble with a drill. And then again, measured about, I think it was about, one time 8 weeks after planting, and then one time at the end of the season. Here's some pictures of what it looked like. So this data is from 2022. We had a pretty dry summer. Interestingly, if you remember the earlier pictures, this is obviously not nearly as dense and lush, but I was still pretty surprised by the amount of biomass that these cover crops produced. This is our field day, I think, in September that we had. So that whole season, the cover crops received 2 inches of rainfall. That was all. It was a very dry summer. When we look at the dry matter or the biomass data, we still got over a ton per acre in most of our treatments. So here, these are the species again, and the varieties that we tested. So a little bit different, but similar to the one that we had at Beladen. So not nearly as much dry matter. Again, it was extremely dry. But we still had fairly decent TDN and TDN levels. So crude protein was lower. This was at the end of, we sampled in October. So the other thing that we looked at for those particular cover crops, we wanted to see how much nitrogen is contained in the cover crop biomass. And if you look at some of those, it's pretty high, right? I mean, we have a lot of nitrogen, and actually also a pretty high carbon to nitrogen ratio. So this concerns me. Well, it could concern me to an extent, because I believe, that could cause some issues with planting, although we didn't have a lot of dry matter. However, the higher the carbon to nitrogen ratio, the longer it takes for the cover crop to decompose. So here, which I should mention this, it can be a good thing, and it can be not such a good thing. In terms of soil health, we do like it when the residue stays on the top of the soil and prevents the soil, prevents erosion. Rainfall impacts all these things, cools the soil. However, it can get a little bit more difficult to plant through it, and that can be some nitrogen immobilization for the subsequent crop. So, yeah. I think I am fairly close to being done here with my talk. So I just wanted to, for a take-home message. So our goal really with this research was to test out different cover crops in different systems of Nebraska. We don't just want to focus on winter annuals, even though they're definitely the most commonly established. I think what we found is that we can really successfully establish a lot of summer annuals. There are a lot of species and variety differences, and I think we should explore them further and see, look a little bit more, dive a little bit more into different soil health benefits. But I think it's also really interesting, we are the ones, you know, providing the research, providing the data, but we also know that for farmers to really adopt these things, adopt new practices, it's a lot more than just us standing in front of them and presenting a bunch of data to them. So what we're really trying to do a lot more with our programs at UNL is, collaborate more with farmers, have peer-to-peer groups, have on-farm research between conservation groups, extension, and producers. Small groups with producers. Some of our colleagues, especially Jenny Rees, she's done a lot of small group work with farmers with soil health practices. But I think what's really interesting, and especially with this trial, is that we did have industry involved, we did have farmers involved, and I think that makes it a little bit more relatable, and hopefully gives us a little bit more credibility. Yeah, so our goal, our end goal, I think, is to have more living plants in the ground year round. And I think I hope that with our research, we're contributing to that a little bit. So, yeah, thank you to Green Cover. If you have never been there, they actually have a field day today, and they have one Friday. It's a really neat place. Yeah, and with that, oh yeah, I had one more resource for those of you that are more interested in cover crops. Midwest Cover Crop Council has a really excellent selector tool. So you can put in all your site-specific information, and it'll give you all the kinds of cover crops, along with some management information. And yeah,